Good evening to our viewers here at home and around the world. I am your host, Ajuri Ngilale, and you are most welcome to the State of the Nation. Nigeria's first three republics were marked by abrupt endings at the hands of military coupists, sometimes violently and other times with a mere radio address to the nation. But either way, the political development and by extension, Nigeria's national development has been the primary victim of those acts. In the politics of this fourth Nigerian republic, the people are offered a choice, not between the philosophical convictions and ideological approaches of political parties, but between groups of political associations that are distinguished more by the amount of time that they have spent in office at various levels than by any tangible platform for action. If we are to define ideology as a distinctive set of persuasions deliberated on by actors to establish a social, economic, and political direction for a nation to pursue, is it not then critical to premise electoral and other political choice on such a foundation? What do we have in Nigeria's present Fourth Republic? Are adjustments needed? How does this catalyze national development? On this edition of the State of the Nation, our panel of experts answer these fundamental questions and more. Events in Egypt over the past 14 months illustrate the importance of ideologically distinct political choice, along with adequate popular participation in the political sphere, such that popular opinions are monitored and taken into official consideration in decisions made by the state. In this first entry from a reporter's notebook, we find out that in Africa's most populous nation, the politics of ideology once reigned supreme. In present-day Nigeria, the relative lack of altruistic politics removes from the nation's democracy key choices about motives and methodology. This turns critical voting decisions about development into choices between political parties that are often based on trivial considerations, such as who has the catchiest campaign slogan or which political party is offering more election day gratification, neither of which moves the nation forward. So let's take a look back at a time in this country when development was the primary objective. At independence in 1960, Nigeria enjoyed a diversity of political ideologies. Some of them were ethnic in nature. Others were indicative of the post-colonial era in which they were built, as evidenced by the common aspiration for independence amongst the main political parties at the time. The three main political parties at the time were predominantly popular in their respective regions, with only Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe's National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, NCNC, enjoying support both across the East and West regions at the time, as it was nationalist in principle and delicately balanced moderate and liberal approaches to various regional and national questions. Sir Ahmadu Bello's Northern People's Congress, NPC, held a conservatism which doubled as the dominant conviction of the northern socio-political elite at the time. It was a regional aristocracy that had focused its efforts on northern-specific regional development. Both socially and fiscally conservative, the NPC sought to make up lost ground, both in terms of human and infrastructural development, in comparison with the two southern regions, by placing a premium on the education and moral development of its young people. To this end, the NPC government spent 1/3 of its resources on education provision. Indicative of the political sophistication of the Western politicians during the period, Chief Obafemi Awolowo's action group was fiscally conservative, though ardent in its commitment to social development and progress. It was enlightened self-interest in the understanding that the prosperity of one's people equates to the stability of one's region that ultimately formed the basis of the Action Group's social compact with the people of the Western region. Almost welfarist in nature, the Action Group's platform would embrace a more paternalistic approach to the citizen-state relationship, offering free primary education and health care. Even as they all implemented different policies regarding the provision of basic services, the regions had responsibilities like health and education, leaving the center to take care of finance, international relations, customs, immigration, and national security. But their approaches to the public good and the provision of these services reflected their ideological persuasions, such that elections served as a contest of not only achievements, but of developmental concepts and ideas. In the First Republic, while ambition played a role, political ideology also served as a basis for the emergence of new splinter groups from the three main political parties. Islamic teachings on equity and social justice comprised the ideological platform of Malam Aminu Kanu's Northern Elements Progressives Union, NEPU, which had grown disenchanted with the aristocratic tendencies of the Northern People's Congress, NPC. He sought a new taxation regime in the region that would tax the ruling northern elites while uplifting the masses. He also advocated for women's rights, a rarity in that era and in that region. But that was then. Today, is it self-interest or ideology that factionalizes and splits the nation's political parties? The Nigerian military's persistent interruption of democratic rule and its accompanied destruction of democratic culture led to a diverse set of ideologically variant politicians coming together to form political parties in the Fourth Republic with a mandate to secure civilian control of power. But this happened without any clear ideological predisposition or governing agenda. So can the political realities of the first two Nigerian republics be manifested once more in the present-day Nigerian situation? This is the topic of today's roundtable discussion when we come back. It is in historic times that we assess the state of the nation. For state and national development evaluation, politics unfiltered, and uncommon analysis of the issues and events of our time, join me, Ajuri Ngilale, right here on AIT. Welcome back to the program. In any democracy where meaningful development is to take place, the political parties hold a critical function in determining the motivations and methods of the candidates they field. A polity where the foremost consideration of the nation's politicians is development has not always been in existence. This has been well documented over time. What is being practiced in Nigeria's present Fourth Republic? Are adjustments needed? How does this catalyze national development? Addressing these critical issues and questions this evening are two knowledgeable authorities on the nation's socio-political landscape. To my right is a highly regarded socio-political scholar and author, Dr. Otive Igbuzo. You are welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
To my left is the Policy and Campaigns Manager of the non-governmental organization ActionAid Nigeria, Mr. Tunde Aremu. You are welcome, sir.
Thank you.
When we talk about an ideologically differentiated polity, we know that hasn't always been in existence, but we also know that there was once a time, particularly in the First Republic, where you had that to a degree. As we've gone away from that, what do you think can be done? What are some of the practical steps that can be taken to revert back to that era where Nigerians had a choice between ideas and not merely personalities and other considerations?
Yeah, I think in order to know what needs to be done, to go back to a political situation or politics where ideology plays prominence, is to know what is responsible for the present situation. If you look at the First Republic, it is very clear that there are certain parties that are left of the center, like the Action Group and Northern Element People's Union, NEPU. And then you have parties at the right, like the Northern People's Congress. And in the Second Republic, it replicated itself. In fact, the Northern People's Congress, majority of the members moved into NPN, when National Party of Nigeria, when majority of the members of the Action Congress moved into the Unity Party of Nigeria, there is a realization, not only in the country, across the world, there is a realization that there is a need to bring back ideology into politics. And so, what needs to be done, the practical step, in my view, the major practical step, is for those who believe, because ideology is a set of ideas or belief. It's a doctrine that people hold, which determines their worldview, it determines their politics, it determines the policy prescriptions that they give. So for Nigeria, I think that the practical step that needs to be taken is for left elements who think that there is alternative to the present dominance of neoliberalism across the political party to now begin to bring ideology back to politics.
The executive governor of Jigawa State, Sule Lamido, raised a lot of eyebrows very recently when he made the statement that the new opposition political parties in the country that are emerging, he said that it was less about ideology, less about a principled approach to governance, a new platform for action, less about that and more about an environment of frustration, of anger, of desperation, that in a bid by politicians to get closer access to the nation's resources, that is the motivation behind the opposition political parties in the country rather than ideology. Mr. Aremu, do you see that being the case?
Well, I think Governor Lamido actually is not wrong in that comment, because it can also be traced probably to his own background too, because I think during the Second Republic he was very close to the PRP, People Redemption Party, which was a party with social democracy as its driving ideology. And for a person like him, you could actually see he's been there, he's at the center of it. And we've also had a lot of stories about, but then let's leave the personality. The issue here is that what do these parties represent? You find out that there's lack of ideology in these parties. Even when Dr. Ubuza was speaking earlier, he spoke about the dominance of neoliberal thinking in these parties. But unfortunately too, you see, if what we even have is a dominance of neoliberal principle, you also know what you are going to tackle. You also think that, okay, you can make prescriptions and say those who are thinking of new parties, can you start looking at alternate thinking? As we had in the First Republic, as he said, that we had NEPO, which was a left-leaning party, and we also had, though not very as popular as AG, not as popular as NEPO, we had Socialist Farmers and Workers Union, which was also, and then Igbira Union, which actually had a seat at the Federal House of Assembly there in the First Republic, was also a left-leaning party. But you find out that this is not existing now. What you actually have a party, maybe when he said anger, I don't know anger at what, but we have a party made up of desperate people. We have parties that are constituted by people whose quest was just for power. They don't have any principle. Because you ask yourself too that, why do you need ideology in parties? There are three things in my thinking. That the first one is the issue of clarity of thought. Just as he said earlier on about policies that drive the system, is when there's clarity of thought that are driven by ideas, that you know, okay, this is what we want to put in place for people. This is what people will benefit from. That's the first one. The second one is the issue of program of action, which is also tied to the first one. And then the last one is also about integrity of leadership. And you find out even that we are deficient in that now, because there's no ideology driving these parties. And until we come to the conclusion that we need ideology and people start moving towards ideology, unfortunately we had an opportunity to get to that point in 1988-89 at the beginning of Babangida's transition program, when you find out that parties actually, people came up to form parties that are also driven by ideology. But unfortunately, the military regime at that time decided to short-circuit it. And what you now had was the contraption they came up with, the SDP and NRC,
yes.
that actually are not very clear in their thoughts what they represent.
And both of them actually supported the continuation of the structural adjustment program, which completely threw off the left versus right contention.
Yes. In the US, you have two dominant parties. There are other parties, but two dominant parties, the Republican and the Democratic Party. Yes, the Republican tends to be ultra-right. And you find out that in 2008 and 2012 election, some high-ranking party members who are already elected officials, even some of them senators, decided that they were going to back Obama, who was from a different party. You could think of alignment along those parties because they knew what they were. There were ideologies that they were responding to, and their own thinking was that their party at that time was becoming an ultra-right party, which they felt was dangerous. And then, but because there was an alternative that they could also respond to and align with, they didn't have to leave their party. What they did was that they felt that their society needed something better than what their party was going to give it. And this other party was also driven by an ideology that no people could benefit from. There were some principles driving it, and they aligned with that, the candidate of that party at that time.
Governor Lamido may be right in some respects, but it's not completely right. Because if you look, there's no complete absence of ideology within the parties. ACN, it is clearly stated that the ideology is social democracy, which is quite different from neoliberal ideology of the other political parties. But I think the challenge is that those political parties were not able to really explain or communicate their ideological differences with the others. And unfortunately, too, the leadership and membership were not able to capture. If you ask the members of these parties what is the ideology of the party, they will not be able to differentiate it. We are playing a kind of politics in Nigeria where all the other opposition parties are waiting for the rejects from the ruling parties, which is what is actually destroying the ideological orientations even of those parties that in their documents put those ideological orientations.
I don't know, maybe I can quickly make a quick intervention because there are genuine concerns actually going on. Yes, Governor Lamido may not be completely right, but then when you also view it from the analysis that have been made, not just by Governor Lamido, but about even the alignments that are taking place. I mean the visible ones now. Because if we keep talking about, I don't want to talk about the ones that are not very visible now, but the ones that are visible. Yes. You also ask yourself, you find somebody who had been in PDP, who had been in AMPP, who had been in virtually all the party, and also because has lost out at different times in some power struggle within those parties, and is moving to the new alignments that are taking place now. And those people are not driven by ideology, they are not driven by ideas, and there are no principles too. It's just about let's capture power, who is in control. I think that's the challenge. And then what we are also
saying is that there is another pocket, even within that,
even
that
within
is saying that there should be ideology. There should be, that's the point I'm making.
Okay. When you drive to work in the morning, you drive past newspaper vendors and you see the headlines. And you will see predominantly the front page of the newspaper holding comments from this governor about this minister or about this presidential source saying this about this other party within the system. How do you get to a point where issues of development, key core issues about what each party stands for, what a choice in an election will actually mean to the voter, when do those issues come to the forefront in Nigerian public discourse?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good question, which is at the center of our discourse. That's why you see that the discourse, in newspapers and all of that is not reflective, because even both the leadership of those parties, when they respond to issues, they don't respond based on the ideological positioning of their own parties. And don't forget that from the late 1990s to the early 2000s, there is a triumphalism. The right ideology, especially the neoliberal version of it, became the dominant view. It became the received wisdom. When you open your television, people will tell you there is no alternative to structural adjustment program. When you open your television, people will tell you, if you don't privatize NEPA, then you can't get light. So, there is a way in which when you receive the information again and again, it becomes the truth. And these people are not aware that in the state of Kerala, in India as a whole is a capitalist state, but Kerala is run by socialists, a different state. And because it's run by socialists, they have state-owned enterprises which are making surplus. They don't call it profit. They are making surplus for the state. But in other climes, they will tell you government has no business in business. So what I'm trying to say is that why you see lack of ideology, lack of focus on ideas, is because the leadership and the membership of those political parties have not imbibed what they have said. And if you see the new alignment that is taking place, those discussions are going on right now about what should be the ideological positioning. So it's not completely true to say that Governor Lamine,
it's still a process.
Yeah, it's still a process.
Okay.
To say that there is clearly, people must realize that in the dialectics of society, there is always a struggle. It's not a uniform thing.
One key point that has been made in this kind of debate about how one can introduce ideology into a political sphere where there is none is this notion that any state, regardless of its political and ethnic composition, any state that is not developed in terms of the provision of even basic services, health, education, you name it, water, all of these, road infrastructure, you name it, that until you have a basic level of basic service provision, the discussions during a campaign will always be about who will provide this basic service, as opposed to what will this person do from an ideological standpoint once they enter power. Is that true?
That is not true at all. Because ideology, like we said, is a set of ideas. It's a set of doctrine. It's your worldview. So ideology will determine how you will provide those services. If you bring that, for instance, to housing, and you bring it to our own situation here, okay, not many people have houses. You get the point. A right prescription to how you will provide housing is that I will do a public-private partnership, in which case government, as the owner of the land, will give the land to private companies. And those private companies, the only thing they will do is to demarcate the land. They demarcate the land, and citizens will pay 5 million naira, 8 million naira to get a plot of land that was given almost free of charge by government. But a left response to that will say, look, government will provide mass housing. So whether you are poor or not, you will have access to those mass housing, given certain criteria, given certain procedure, and given certain mechanism. But in the right response to housing, the poor has no chance at all of having a house.
I want to just harken back to the First Republic, particularly the Northern People's Congress, NPC, that ruled in the north under Sir Ahmadu Bello. We know that over time, during the First Republic, there was a breakaway, and you alluded to it earlier, NEPU, led by Malam Aminu Kano. What you see after that is the pact they now made with Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe's NCNC politically, where their agendas aligned. Can you speak a little bit quickly about how the introduction of ideology into the nation's politics might affect the political alignments themselves within the space?
Let's go to Senegal, their recent election. We find out that the Workers' Party became a dominant party in the last election. It was never a strong party, but in the last party, it became a dominant party because there were issues that it was raising, that party was raising, that these are things that the citizens in Senegal need, and these are things that ways in which they must come about it. Now, where that could also happen in Nigeria is that where we also say the alignments that are going to happen are going to be based on principles, not on the principle of next big door neighbor. That you look for one big man in the neighborhood who can drag people into your party, who can make your party visible without thinking about what ideas that person subscribes to.
So a party in Senegal, the Workers' Party, that wasn't popular at one time, because of the ideology attached to that party platform, became popular.
Yes, it was able to draw other smaller parties.
Yes.
Other parties that were originally small, but subscribe to the same principles, espouse the same idea as that party. They were able to draw them into their fold, and that was how they became the dominant party.
That certainly bolsters any argument that suggests that ideology is critical to a nation's political development. And on that, because we don't have time, on that note, we will have to close this edition of the State of the Nation. I just want to thank our panel of experts, Dr. Otive Egbuzo, Mr. Tunde Aremu, for your time and participation this evening. My name is Ajuri Ngelale. Until next time and always, may God